is my reflections on Central America. We went to study immigration and migration issues at the current moment of February 2020. So here you will see the group of people that traveled down there together. There were 24 of us in total that went down there. It was a travel seminar that was run by the Presbyterian Mission Agency. They run usually 2 to 3 trips a year. They run them to places where we as Presbyterians really want to go and learn more about. It's not necessarily for us to go and do mission ourselves or something of that nature. It is for us to kind of go and learn about a particular issue at that place at that time. I think most of you probably know that this is my 3rd trip with the Presbyterian Mission Agency. I find them extremely informative. I went to Russia with them at first to study how the church has recuperated after the time of communism and how the church has kind of come back from there. And then I went to Rwanda on the 25th anniversary of the genocide to kind of see how the church has been a part of reconciliation and healing there. And then I went to Central America, obviously, with this group of people to study kind of immigration, migration issues, to learn more from the people on the ground. We traveled through 3 different countries. We started in Ecuador and then went to Guatemala and Honduras. We started in each of these countries has a little bit different reason for migration. In this picture, I will say there are pastors, there are ruling elders or just members of churches who are interested in this. And we also have 3 Presbyterian mission co-workers. So Dory, who is on the bottom right, I believe, works in Honduras and works with Alex, who has his hands raised on the left. Alex actually works in part with the Presbyterian Church Living Waters program. So he helps us coordinate putting wells into areas of Honduras. That is his primary job, but he also helps coordinate with Dory groups that come down and things like that. And then you won't see in this picture Tracy. Tracy is the regional director of Central America and kind of coordinates all the mission co-workers. She herself lived in Nicaragua until a year or 2 ago when it became more unsafe. And so she has come back to the US, but still goes down frequently and knows more general, the whole area. And lastly, there is in the corner our Guatemalan mission co-worker who has also been down there for an extended period of time. This group of people is standing also, just to let you all know, in front of a Presbyterian Women Retreat Center. So this is a center that they use for many different reasons, but it is where they housed us in our time in Honduras together. So as I said, our trip really was truly to go down and to learn more. The Presbyterian Church has been trying to study and become more educated on the issues in Central America to be informed as to what our role and responsibility should be in that. This past General Assembly, there was actually supposed to be a large report on Central America that was presented to the whole General Assembly. That unfortunately was one of the issues that was pushed off for 2 years. So kind of like this trip, a lot of the work that is happening down there because of COVID and everything that we're currently going through is getting pushed off. But for many of these people, what is happening daily is life and death. So the first place that we were was in Ecuador. So Ecuador is a place that is a tiny country. It experiences, I would say, the greatest amount of gang violence of any of the 3 countries that we lived in, that we visited. I thought it was a telling statement, and I can't remember which of our presenters, but they said in El Salvador, everyone is incarcerated. And literally, as you travel through El Salvador, you will see barbed wire blocking off different neighborhoods. Everyone knows which area is a gang-related territory and which is not. Many people who had small businesses and a working livelihood and were taking care, unfortunately, have had to flee their homes because of gang violence. There's many, many displaced people because of the gang violence, particularly there. The picture I'm showing you, this was one of our very first stops. It was to Juan Calvino School, which even though we don't speak Spanish, hopefully most of you can recognize is John Calvin's school. It was started by a church group in the middle of a gang related area. One of the issues that they have found with education there is that many people cannot even get to the school that they are supposed to be educated in because they can't cross gang lines to get to school. So they find themselves boxed in, unable to travel to school. So this school was started kind of in the middle. It's a school that kind of has made a bit of peace with the gangs in that area to allow children to come to school and to be educated there. As you see on the right, the statistic is that 50% graduate, but only 7% can read and write. So the level of education, the quality of education is fairly poor. The thing that we appreciate about this school was it was fairly holistic. They had kids from preschool all the way up to high school, and we got to step in and meet some of them. And they also they have a couple of social workers that are on hand to help those who are going through unsafe issues at home, or to be honest, all over Central America, there are many people that are dealing with trauma and need some mental health help or psychological help. There was a great group there that they have a poetry group that they are learning how to express their feelings and kind of what they're processing through poetry. So we did get to hear one or two of those poems. I didn't put the picture of the kids in here because I just have to be very cautious with people in Central America and showing pictures. You never know. And so that was one of the warnings that we were given kind of about this stuff, is just to be very cognizant of what we show publicly. So as I said, education is a poor level, is poor across Guatemala and Honduras. Honduras, we learned some more statistics about their education level. The more educated you are, the harder it is to actually find a job there. Also, the older you become in Honduras, the harder it is to find a job. So if you have a job and lose it, the percentage likelihood of you getting another job, the older you are, it significantly decreases. So there's very little motivation for people to really go through their education. It's easier to get out early and to try and find a job to help support your family. And one of the people that we see trying to migrate the most are actually those students who have gone through graduate school and such, but cannot find any way to use their degrees or their education, and they desperately desire to be able to use the education they have received. So there's some misnomers sometimes around people who migrate, but one of the groups that really would like to migrate is usually educated people there who cannot find work in their country fits their education. The other thing I will say on the right, and we heard this in many countries, it was very, I think, startling for many of us as Americans, but people would say, you know, we have the right to migrate, but also the right not to migrate. One of the guys in Honduras very bluntly said to us, like, you know, you all think that we desperately want to get into America, but many of us would prefer to live at home and to live with our families and the units where we have lived for generations. We would prefer not to leave. We only leave because it's out of stark desperation that we feel that we have to leave, either to support our families or because we're trying to escape violence or some other reason. The reality is that if possible, most people would choose to stay put if they could have at least their basic human rights and human needs met. So while we were traveling through Central America, we met with about 25 different groups and people. It was a great survey of groups across the way. We met with Christian nonprofits. We met with the Red Cross. We met with Catholic Relief Services. We met with the El Salvadorian Migration Department of the government. We met with those who were studying and those who are doing work, more hands-on work. So there was really a great kind of breadth of people that we get to hear from. And there were some commonalities that we continue to hear from many, many different people. So the picture that you see is us. We spent most of our time in El Salvador. You can't travel to and from places very easily there. So there's a church called Iglesias Reformado Calvinista del El Salvador. And it is a tiny, tiny Protestant church that we have a connection with. It is also a very amazing church because it is basically run by a few women who there is a great need for, as people come back from being deported out of the US and out of Mexico. They literally come back with nothing. They do not have a toothbrush. Some of them don't even have shoelaces in their shoes. They don't have a cell phone. They're just kind of dropped off usually at a bus stop, or if they fly in at the airport, and then they're kind of left to their own devices to try and figure out what to do. So these women have offered, you can stay for up to 15 days, kind of a very temporary thing. But you can stay there, you have a bed, you have a meal. They try and have, again, a social worker on hand to kind of help a little bit with the trauma that they've experienced. And the ladies would talk about, they had people that would come and would say maybe 5 words in total the whole time that they were there, or would barely want to leave their bedroom. You could just tell that many of these people had lived very hard stories. But they hosted us, they fed us, and they also have a space where we could meet with many of these other people. So this picture is of Cesar Rios, who works with Insami. And basically they study the root reasons for migration. They study the statistics of why people are migrating, the trends and things like that. So they are looking more at kind of gathering the information and the background of it. As I said, there are commonalities, and many of the people talked about push factors and root causes, or push factors and pull factors. So the push factors are the things that push people out of their country, the reasons that they leave. So violence, insecurity, food insecurity, just insecurity in general, reunification with families are 3 of the top reasons that people are pushed out of the country. And they said that when they interviewed El Salvadorians, 80% marked either that they felt insecure in their basic needs, or they felt threatened by violence. And so those were the 2 predominant reasons that people left. So those were the push factors. The pull factors are better economic opportunities in the US, ways to support your family, things like that. So both of those can play a part in why someone chooses to leave, but usually leaving is a last resort. You can see on the side a list of just a few of the other people that we met with in El Salvador. We met with Jorge Peralta, who's an international organization for migration. Kay Andrade, I'm not going to say her name exactly right. She is actually an American who went over kind of in a Peace Corps capacity, or a young adult volunteer in the Presbyterian world, like a year of volunteer service, went to El Salvador and basically just felt called there. So she's been there for I think about 20 years now. She works with Catholic Relief Services. She works on trying to give youth skills and basically job opportunities. One of the things that they have found in El Salvador is that the education is poor, but also because parents are having to work 12-hour days, their children are left at home without really anyone to watch over them. And so gangs tend to recruit those children that are kind of hanging around on their own and don't really have someone to look out for them. So this is a way for them to hopefully give them some skills and get them in a job before a gang can really recruit a teenager of sorts. And Doris Evangelista, I'll talk more about her, but joining hands in El Salvador. is a Presbyterian hunger program that is sponsored in El Salvador. So these are the ladies who run the church that I mentioned. I don't think I also said the PDA, Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, sends them hygiene bags that are given out to many of the migrants. So I know our kids put together some of those to be sent to either those who have gone through hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that, or forest fires, but also these bags can be sent down to give hygiene products to those who have been deported. So these three ladies basically run the whole program. So you can see that 300 to 350,000 people are moving in a year out of a population of 5.5 million. So it's a significant percent that are moving yearly. As I said, multicultural migration, so pursuit of better living conditions, including jobs and services, fleeing violence, or desire for family reunification. So El Salvador is one of the lowest populations, but is one of the highest asylum seekers. Free trade zones, as I said, where people have to work 12 hours a day, have actually broken up the family system and made it hard for them to keep the unit or to prevent violence. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that El Salvadorians particularly migrate or displaced within their country. So it's a very tiny country, but many people who face violence, they try and find them a place to live within the country, migrate them to another spot that they might be safe within country. But the problem is El Salvador is so tiny and that the gang connections are so big that it is very rare that somebody can even be moved, migrated within country and still continue to be safe. Unfortunately, usually the only way that they can truly find safety is by leaving the country. So not only do you have people that are trying to migrate to Mexico and the United States particularly, but there are people that are continually being displaced within the country. So it just creates a system of upheaval and chaos in every community that you experience. And I will say people are dropped off in the middle of cities that they do not know. And even if they have family, sometimes halfway across, people have no idea how to even get themselves to the place where the village maybe that their family is located in. So a lot of the groups that we worked with, as I said, there were groups that were studying why people migrate. A lot of the groups were kind of those coming in and helping in those first 2 weeks of coming back different ways. The nonprofits are coming in and trying to make sure that people have their basic needs met or can get to where they have some type of family or security. Just to share, I always like to share about the Presbyterian mission opportunities that we have been a part of in different places, but the Joining Hands Network is a huge initiative in El Salvador that was started in 2012 by the Peace USA Hunger Program. And at that time, they were coming out of war that affected all of them. There had been earthquakes and climate change, which included drought and floods. And climate change is a huge, huge issue, particularly in Guatemala. But this is part of the reason why many people can no longer provide themselves with even just enough food to feed their families, is because with climate change, the change in weather has allowed all of those natural crops they used to grow to not be able to grow, or to grow a significantly less amount. One of the goals of the group is agricultural free of pesticides. They were trying to discern what way they could best help those in El Salvador. And this woman actually came to the forefront. She came and knocked on the door and said, I need some help. And I heard that maybe you all could help. She's a mother of 6, and she had just buried her 3rd son who had had chronic kidney disease, had been diagnosed with it. So 3 of her sons had all had it. It was obviously coming from the pesticides, but they had no other option to make money. So they continued to put their health at risk in order to provide food and to support their families. 80% of women's population is affected by chemicals in these particular areas where they're farming in this way. So the group has tried to put TV programs, radio, newspaper, and articles together to tell people about the grave consequences and how truly these farmers, for their own health, need to stop using chemicals. Now that gets hard because promoting consuming organic foods means that they cannot produce as much food and ship it out as they normally would have. Canada and the US have always been major buyers of sugar, which has decimated some of their natural crops because people continue to try and plant sugar is one of their bigger agricultural products. So the sugar fields are full of chemicals usually too, and politicians own these fields. So people rent out the fields or work the fields, but there's not a strong motivation from the politicians to change these practices. The other thing that Joining Hands Network does is realizing that climate change has been a huge issue and it's ruined their soil in many ways, along with having these extended periods of drought, not getting normal rain seasons like they've had in the past. This organization has tried to go back to study and learn more about the natural foods that occurred in El Salvador, things that just naturally grow, and to try and educate and promote alternative food for people, things that can easily grow there. So they have a festival each year to promote these foods, to show people how they can cook and eat them and how nutritious they can be. The other thing that they do, and I would say, you know, there's a divide definitely between Catholic and Protestant in all these Central American places, but they try to bridge the gap between the Catholic priests, the Catholics and the Protestants. And they've had the Catholic priest and evangelic pastor sit down and share at a table to hopefully show unity, or to show that truly we need to work together to help one another. Here you'll see Father Romero, who's a very famous Catholic priest who was actually assassinated in the middle of a mass because he continued to speak up against the politicians and to talk about the corruption that was happening in the country. And so he was gotten rid of. But so he is very much elevated, not just by Catholics, but I would say by all people in El Salvador, for having the bravery to speak against and to try and truly bring to light some of the issues that were occurring in El Salvador. So you'll see this is a mural of him. You can visit his house and you'll see him around. This other picture right here is just to show you, we are very honored to have a few people come and talk to us about their experiences of migration and be very open and honest. So here is one woman who very much wanted to share her story. Her family had been threatened by violence and by gang violence, and her daughters were threatened sexually even. Unfortunately, sexual assault is a huge thing down there. So she had desperately left the country, came to the US to receive asylum, had put her case in and was waiting in one of the centers when unfortunately word got back to her. She had to leave her daughters behind. They couldn't afford to bring all of them. At that point, it's a very expensive thing for them to even try and get up to the border to ask for asylum. So basically, she had to choose between coming back to El Salvador to be there for her daughters, or to continue her case up in the US border area. And she chose to come back to be with her daughters and to try and get them out of harm's way. Unfortunately, she was too late for them to fully miss the violence. They weren't able to get out safely in time. So there's a lot of traumatic stress that has come about that, but she wants to continue to share her story as someone who, you know, is trying to find asylum in the correct way, but also had to make a very difficult choice, and that unfortunately many people are making these difficult choices each day. And the other little blurb I just have up here to remind me was, it's interesting, in El Salvador, you can get out of a gang. There aren't many ways to get out of a gang, to be honest, but you can get out of it by becoming a Christian. But if you proclaim that you are now a Christian and cannot be part of a gang, that gang will continue to check up on you and make sure that you are attending mass, that you are giving tithes and offering, and that you're legitimately now a Christian. So it's not something that you can easily say to get you out of a gang and then move on your way. But so for many, finding relief, whether they're in a gang or just being threatened by gangs, is significant. And it's something they live with a daily terror every day, from even getting on the bus, and bus drivers have to pay money for their safety, for their bus's safety along the routes. So there's just a level of continued trauma that people live in each and every day. As they said, people, or every person, is incarcerated because they very much do not get to live in a way where they feel safe at any point, really, in their days. This is just a mural that I really liked outside Father Romero's church and house, just to show a bit of more of the El Salvadorian art style. So now I'm kind of moving a bit on to Guatemala. So these three people here are part of the Association of Returned Guatemalans. These three people have all been deported back from the United States and found themselves in Guatemala again. They each shared their stories of how they ended up back. I cannot remember which of the gentlemen, but one of them came to the US when he was 15 and had been in the US, had a family, children there for over 30 years. Unfortunately, had a traffic violation and then was sent back to Guatemala. And he luckily had his mother was at least still in Guatemala. So he had some family support. His sister had brought him up when he was 15 to be in the US. So he had, I believe, a green card, but because he had a violation against him, he was sent back. So he had not lived in Guatemala for over 30 years, did not understand the culture really, was very much Americanized. His whole family is still in the US, his children and grandchildren, because he knows it's not safe for him to try and return in any form. He has decided to remain there and to only Skype with his family. In many ways, has accepted the situation without as much bitterness as I probably would feel in the midst of being separated from my kids and my grandkids. But so he is back there. And our other two friends on the screen have also had similar stories. One of them was in the US for 10 to 12 years. The other one was there for over a decade too. When you were deported after a decade, over a decade, you have to sign saying that if you ever attempt to come back and they catch you, you will be imprisoned for at least 10 years. So many people don't think it's worth even trying to get back into the United States if they have to sign that and possibly be imprisoned for 10 years. So really, they all came back, and it was very clear that those who were coming back, again, are just kind of coming back into a culture, a place that they don't know, with very little resources on them, very little way of navigating Guatemala. They talked about the scammers that stay outside of the airport and say, pay me this money and I'll take you to wherever you need to be, and then take the money and don't actually take them, and such. So they work on at least offering support to those as they immediately return from. Many people have a phone, but they don't have the phone charger that they would have for the phone. So they allow them to make a phone call to a family member. They also will go to them with a bank to exchange money, because many times, if they know that you do not have, if you're from the States or coming from the States, that you don't know the exchange rate, so they will cheat you a bit on that exchange rate and give you significantly less money. So they go just to make sure that you are getting a fair exchange in your currency. A lot of people also come and maybe have medical issues. So, they're diabetic, but they are sent and they don't have insulin and things like that. Medicine is not easy to get in many of these places, to be honest, but they try and help you navigate the system of getting some of those basic things that you need. Many of the other organizations that we were with also will try and help some of these groups. This group does not do this in particular, but maybe figure out how to get you a job. A lot of people come with some type of skill, don't have their tools, they're left back in the US. So there are certain certifications you have to be able to work in a skill. So they try and help you get that skill or find the tools so that you can practice your trade and start making some money for yourself, a livable kind of wage. So that is part of them. The other group who is listed on here is part of a Catholic organization that has safe homes kind of along the normal migrant paths, so that they can offer water, food, emergency services to those who are traveling through. He was a very interesting person to hear from theologically. He talked a lot about the migrants that he has studied in the Bible, from Moses and Joseph and their stories. And probably one of the things I loved most was that he said, we're all migrants who were called to live in tents. Our lives are migratory because we're all here for a limited amount of time. So he was a very interesting person to speak to from a more religious perspective of trying to help people along the caravan paths in Guatemala and up Central America. This is the Guatemalan Museum that we visited about the history, which all these countries have history, but Guatemalan's history has had many times of deep violence, dictatorship, revolution, and such. So the sign here that you're asked to take is to be a part of change. And all of the cloth banners, if you can see them above us, are made for someone who went missing and was never recovered in the midst of the violence that was seen kind of 60s, 70s, 80s, I believe, kind of time period. There are many people whose families do not know where they went or have never been recovered. This is just to give you a picture of the Guatemalan settlements. These are all along the city. They're kind of temporary. They're very unsafe. They're not made to be permanent housing, and they are on cliffs. So if those cliffs in any way start to crumble, or if there's an earthquake, many of these would just completely fall to pieces and fall apart. Guatemala, by policy, is considered one of the 3rd safe countries for asylum seekers. So many of the people who are trying to get to the US or Mexico are sent to Guatemala as their safe country. Just like in El Salvador, it's very small and people could be moved to another part, and the gangs in Guatemala are very significant too, and usually the ties and gang connections reach from El Salvador to Guatemala. So it's not really a safe country, even though that's what it has been deemed under policy, and many people are sent there to wait asylum. One of the interesting pieces of that we learned is that each country has bilateral agreements instead of a regional agreement. So they're all divided in that sense. And many people would like for there just to be a regional agreement about the policies and procedures that are happening there. In the past, you could travel between these 3 countries without a passport or having to worry. That is not really the option anymore. Governments continue to change rules. Migration in Guatemala started in about the 80s. It was mainly men at that time leaving, coming to the US to make some money, to send back to their families. Eventually, women started to come, and then children in the end, and whole families. But so it's had a long period of migration. And as they say, the laws on migration have not changed over several of our presidents, but the way it is interpreted has changed. This is just, unfortunately, but I think just a piece. So this is a memorial set for a girls' boarding house where unfortunately they were kind of locked in. So they're just talking about, unfortunately, if you find yourself without family and are put into like the system. So they think one of the girls set a fire in the room with the mattress. It went on fire. The room was locked, so the girls could not get out. So all of these girls lost their lives. And so this memorial set up because they're hoping and waiting for justice to still be brought for these tragic lives. These girls were, I mean, between pre-adolescent age, so kind of like 8 to 13 for the most part, I think. So just plowing right through. Now we are in Honduras. These pictures are from Honduras. Our last stop along the way. Both of these pictures are of people who tried to migrate at one point and shared their stories with us of migration. The couple on the left is kind of where we were told, it was only out of desperation that, migration happens, that honestly people really truly would love to be able to stay there, but they found that they could not afford. They have two twin boys and themselves, and they could not make a living wage. So his plan was originally just to come up to the US for a couple years to try and make some money to send back home and enough to kind of support them, and then to come back. He hired a coyote, got pretty far along with his brother and brother-in-law, and then turned back. The amount of violence he saw along the way, people that are kind of stolen and put into human trafficking, the people that fall off of trains and are injured, it's just the whole way is a traumatic event. Whether you were the victim of trauma, you witnessed the amount of people he said he saw die was in the double digits. So a very traumatic. His wife said him leaving was one of the worst things. She went from 130 to 90 pounds and told him that she didn't care what their lives was like in Honduras, that they needed to stay together, that she couldn't handle that separation. The other guy on the right is actually a pastor of a church. He unfortunately heard that there was a program under Obama where you could come for 6 months, earn some money, and come back to your country, but it was a scam. And apparently the scam has been going on for decades. So he gave this gentleman tons of money so that he could get this visa of sorts to come to the US for this limited time period and work. His money was taken. He went into debt. Many people go into debt trying to make their way here. So it's unfortunately a first circle of most people fail to get to the US. And so they end up coming back and then are in more debt because they have offered up their house or land or something in order to pay for them to even have the opportunity to try and get to the US. So that is the situation. He found all his money had been taken, even though he was trying to go about it in a way that he thought was legitimate, and found himself in a great deal of debt that he's still working his way out of slowly. So just a few things over on the side, just to give you an understanding of what it is like if you are a Honduran there. Many people who try to go about migrating legally realize that it is almost impossible. The people in the embassies are told that they are to see 100 people in 5 hours. That is the quota of people per day they're supposed to see. They're only allowed to give out 3 visas in a day. And if you break down, it's about 3 minutes per person. Most people describe even going to the embassy as one of the most humiliating experiences they've ever had. They are not looked at as humans. People have to psych themselves up to go. Usually, even if you brought your folder full of all your paperwork and stuff, the folder is not even opened. And so it costs $160 just to go to the embassy. And each time you try, it's $160. So the reality is that can be cheaper to try and go with a coyote, because usually you get a 3 chance policy than to continue to try and go to the embassy and hope that you are one of the people who is granted one of these visas. Reasons for migration, usually in Honduras, you make $8 to $12 a day. In the US, you can make $8 to $12 an hour. So for a very short time, you can provide for your family for a while if you can get up here. 67% of Hondurans live in poverty. Of the 8 million, 5 million live in poverty. Many of their agricultural businesses that they've had are completely demolished. Coffee was a big business there. It's highly corrupt. Many of the politicians rule it. They'll buy people's coffee for cheap and then wait until the price goes up. Unfortunately, these people cannot wait to sell their coffee. Also, many people have asked why they don't try and do fair trade coffee options of sorts, but the amount of money that you have to pay in to then be able to sell your coffee is impossible for people to save to even have that ability to legally sell their coffee in that way. So for many people, it truly feels like the only option is to come to the US. Just so most people know, the caravans that we saw on TV were mainly Hondurans, not Guatemalans and El Salvadorians, but Hondurans. And the more people that go together, the cheaper it usually is. So people would take that risk of getting to the Mexico border. And even on the Mexico border, when people are trying to kind of come through, people sell numbers on wait lists. There are wait lists that you're given with numbers that are in the thousands, and you just have to hope that your number is called. But while people wait for their number to be called, then they are waiting in a city that they then have to spend money on food, shelter, things like that. So none of this is a cheap experience. And many of these people live with a desperation that I don't think any of us have experienced. So this is, I just wanted to quickly throw in the other hunger program that we are a part of, helps people there fish. So many people, the fishing industry has kind of been decimated, or people have moved to the cities, but so they're trying to help them. And climate change has also changed fish migration patterns, so you can't get the same amount of fish. So they are trying to help them with that. But this gentleman who's part of the hunger program also studies a lot of statistics about Honduras. So just for a few facts, only 20 public hospitals are in Honduras. There's not a single one that's been rebuilt or remodeled since 1994. Very little is spent on healthcare, and many centers have no medicine or expire in medicine. Another group that we met with, the American Justice Society. I don't think the A is right, but sorry. They are a group that it's both American and Hondurans run the nonprofit, although Hondurans take the majority. But they look at how much medicine is available, the corruptness in getting medical supplies, things like that, and try and hold the government accountable in that sense. They also, one of the interesting things about them is a lot of people, because gangs and such violence, testifying to witnessing a crime never goes well for you. And so they have created a way that people wear burqas and get in a box to be able to testify without endangering their lives, which has helped at least bring some justice to some of the crime that is happening in Honduras. But between these two organizations, we learned that truly the access to any type of medical medicines, medical health, or medical care is very minimal in this country. They have high expenditures on arms when the country is not at war. So people question why some of that money can't be spent on some of the hospitals and healthcare. And just again, a stark statistic, a woman dies every 17 hours since January, and there's a high level of violence against children. This is at the American Justice Society, 1 John 3:16 there, but this is a mural of hope that they have. This is just to show you how crowded the Honduran city is. There are parts of Honduras that are more rural, but the amount of people that are packed on top of each other is phenomenal. And lastly, I thought I would end with this picture. This is a statue of Jesus Christ that has been erected over the capital in Honduras, showing Jesus welcoming all. And so it kind of sits there, and was one of the very last things we visited, and kind of reminds us of our charge to care for one another.